Alex Amancio, welcome to An Actor Despairs. How you doing, brother?
Good. Yourself?
I'm really good, man. I had a good workout today, so I'm in a good mood. I just was sick, but man, I did so much research on you and what you've done with like as a storyteller, like with let alone your company Reflector Entertainment, but at
Mhm.
UBISOFT and with Assassin's Creed and the games. Like I'll be 100% transparent. I've never been a gamer, but I've had vast appreciation. The only games I ever played was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater or like Grand Theft Auto to kill hookers and get as many police off. But I don't know what that says about me, but I'll ask my therapist. But man, I really appreciate like optically what you were able to do with like Unity and Revelations, like let alone the Paris, like just it's amazing. I've heard for a long time from people that I really respect in the business that the
Mhm.
narratives are vastly superior in games than they are in
Mhm.
movies, and I
Mhm.
believe it because like the
Mhm.
let's we live in a time where corporate property remains supreme in
Mhm.
entertainment, and it's
Mhm.
Marvel and you know copyrighted material. But in
Mhm.
gamer world, I feel like there's still niche culture that you can explore, and that
Mhm.
leaves really cool room for storytelling. So I'm
Mhm.
I'm so curious to talk to you about how you got started into all this and
Mhm.
how you
Mhm.
kind of built your way. But if you don't mind, if we could go to the very beginning, let talk to me about growing up.
Yeah. Look, I grew up in Montreal, which is I had the it's chance actually because Montreal being a sort of uh, a collision of two cultures. There's the French culture, the English culture. I think it's provided Montrealers with a very specific sort of like dual lens through which we see the world, and I think this is one of the secrets of Montreal. Why it's such an important epicenter for creativity, especially in the video game world, but it goes even beyond that. I mean, Montreal is also the birthplace of Cirque du Soleil. It's home to a burgeoning film industry, special effects industry, and I think that's like a large portion of that is due to this collision of two ways of thinking, which gets people to sort of see things from a different perspective.
Yeah. And I feel like from what I've heard from artist friends that live in Canada, they're much more supportive of the arts there. Like they give grants to
Mm.
filmmakers and artists. Is that true?
It
Yeah.
is, and yeah, I think there's a really good equilibrium between the business aspect of it, which is obviously where we need to make money. If something isn't profitable, it long term it's not viable.
Yeah.
But there's a good balance between that and also empowering emerging artists to create their craft, because a lot of times it's through original and not necessarily very business viable craft
Yeah.
that you get the leaders of tomorrow. I mean, like, look, one need only look to George Lucas, the
Yeah.
first films that he created, THX 1138. I mean, look, God knows that's never going to be something that's financially viable, but it that experimentation is what essentially allowed him to sort of like step towards the next leg of his life, which is reinventing the model, so to speak.
That's amazing. And then I'm curious, like growing up, were your parents artists at all? Or
They weren't. So my dad, he's been, from like three or four generations back in the car business, and
wow.
yeah, and my mom's in banking. So um, I actually started off my path as going. Like I was initially going to go into the sciences. I'm a physics buff. I've always loved physics, and
That makes total sense.
that was going to be my
Yeah.
life, right? And like as often is the case, my parents said, you know what, you like writing, you like like I drew a lot, I played instruments, so they're like, you arts are always going to be a part of your life, and you can draw upon them for inspiration and use them as hobbies, but then get a real job,
Yeah.
and that's how I thought my life was going to play out. And then I went to see this movie called Jurassic Park,
Oh
and
God. The best.
my mind was blown with, I mean, for the first time we could create stuff in our minds
Yeah.
and execute them with the help of computers to a level that was essentially indistinguishable to the human eye from something that's real. And I that's when I like left everything behind and tried to find where I could learn this new craft,
Yeah.
and started learning about 3D animation. And I wanted to create worlds essentially. And this was the first time that I saw a clear path for me how to achieve that.
Totally. And talk to me, at what moment in your life, were you an undergrad? Were you in high school? Like when did this happen?
I was like, I think I was probably like 19 years old.
So you
So
were maybe in your first year.
yeah, exactly. And like going on, science was going to be my thing, and then I just left everything behind. I dropped out and
Wow.
found this because you couldn't get any, you couldn't learn computer graphics back then
Yeah.
in school. It was so emergent. So I essentially found this school, this private school that would give I think it was like this 10-month crash course of learning the basics of 3D graphics and
Was
animation.
Adobe a thing yet at this point, or?
No, there were two major companies doing it. So Softimage
Yeah.
and Alias Power Animator.
And,
These
and
were the
and are
two.
either still operating today, or?
Yeah, they are. They are.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, they are. And so Alias became Maya. So it's still one of the, and Softimage got absorbed, but Maya still exists.
Yeah.
And and so I did the course, and afterwards I tried getting a job like in something creative. I wanted to pursue this. Like, how can I now use this knowledge? It's either going to be in films or in games, and
Yeah.
I ended up getting a job at a small gaming company. Entered on the art side, ended up managing the art team on a small art team on a tennis game.
Wow.
Knew nothing about tennis.
And
Um,
what mechanism are we talking? Like Super Nintendo, or what me?
First Xbox.
First, oh wow, I
Yeah,
remember
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Wow.
So, worked on the game, and it was a small company, so a lot of people like have to wear many hats. Like you don't have enough money to do everything you want to do. So, if you want something done and there's nobody to do it, well, you could either like just like draw an X on it or do it yourself.
Yeah.
So I had to very quickly in my career start essentially stretching out my talents. Um, uh, pick, Picked up some writing skills very quickly, some technical skills on the art side. Started getting interested in the whole experience part of the game, not just the art side.
Yeah.
And then essentially went from that small company to a much larger company called UBISOFT,
Yeah.
where I essentially was assigned as art director on a game called Far Cry 2.
Wow.
And I started like really pushing the envelope of everything visual. How can we recreate real dynamic weather patterns, natural elements that would actually react to the player, not just static, actually,
Yeah.
stuff that you could burn, stuff that could be affected by the wind.
And the way
So
light, it optically
yeah,
reflects through a taxi.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. How to simulate surfaces like stone, metal, but not just with static pictures, but with real dynamic materials. And then like that was quite a success. Afterwards, I decided to expand my knowledge, and I
Yeah.
asked Ubisoft, look, I think I'm ready to go to the next step, and I'd like to creative direct the game. And creative direction is similar to what a showrunner would do on TV. So you're
You're
essentially,
managing the whole team.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're the creative managing the whole of the team, and started doing that on Assassin's Creed, and yeah, so that's how
Wow.
I sort of like evolved towards the role of creative director in games.
And while you were building your way, were you, with that Jurassic Park cathartic experience, were you immersing yourself in reading screenplays, like reading novels? Like, what was your experience? Because you're a storyteller. I'm so
Yep,
curious
yep.
how that evolved.
Yeah. So, of course, reading is a big part of it. Reading screenplays, reading books. Um, I think that it's through absorbing all of that, the greatness that was done by other people, that one gets to perfect their craft. And I've also, even while I was creative directing Revelations, which is the first Assassin's Creed that I did, I was in parallel actually writing the first pilot that I have ever written for TV. I was just doing it for fun. It's
Wow.
something that I was. It's a medium that always interested me, so I wanted to see where I could take it. So a lot of practice and a lot of just if you love something, doing it isn't a chore. And I think
Yeah.
it's through doing and through refining that you perfect your craft.
Yeah, I totally agree. And
Yeah, yeah.
talk to me as you were building this. Like, did you feel that this was your calling? Like, I imagine if you were doing physics, you would have been miserable. Like, it must have felt great to be doing what you love.
Yeah, definitely. And again, like that's the real measure of if what you're doing is what you love, is what you're truly passionate about, is if you don't count the time you spend on it, right? If
Yeah,
it's just something that you as soon as you hit a challenge, all you want to do is crack it and push for more, and you're always looking for the next challenge, right?
yeah,
I strongly believe that excellence isn't something that you attain.
yeah,
It's a constant moving target. It's something that you have to strive for constantly. And sometimes, in rare moments, you might get a glimpse of excellence, but it's fleeting, right? I don't think you ever achieve that excellence.
yeah.
And actually, I think any artist, um, I think that your life's path is chasing that impossible target.
Yeah, of course. Because if you attain it, what's the point of
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
amazing. And I'm
yeah.
curious, like to help the audience understand, because I know there's so many people out there that are interested in gaming, building, gaming design, and
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
went to NYU, Tisch School of the Arts, and the year I went there, they introduced the game design program. I think now it's
Hmm.
like one of the foremost in the United States, but at the time that was like a pretty, revolutionary thing for a first degree university to kind of establish that.
Hmm.
In the early 2000s, how did you find this path? Like, was it a natural progression, or did you have some kind of advisors along the way?
It was pretty much of a natural progression. Like and I mean, this was stated by many talented and smart people in the past. Like you can only you never know where the decisions that you take are going to lead you. It's easier when in hindsight to see a clear
Of
path.
course. Yeah.
But when you're doing it, it's just you're following your gut and you're following your heart, and you're always taking the plunge.
Yeah.
Like if I had to give any sort of advice to anybody, would be usually your gut knows, and taking the plunge is and sacrificing and risking it all for passion is the only real way of reaching it, right? There's always a level of sacrifice. So it's sometimes a lonely path to
Yeah.
get to where you want to go. But I think that if you always follow that gut feeling in your heart, that's how you know that you might be on the right path. And sometimes you succeed and sometimes you don't. So for me, finding that path was a very was a very educational experience where like learning to always trust yourself, to always never doubt, and to always look um, for the silver lining in any decision
Hmm.
is key. And then I mean, look, we live the video game industry is and the craft of actually making games is a nascent one, right? So we're still learning the more or less the rules of what it is to create a game. If we were to compare this to Hollywood, we would be sort of like in the 30s or something right now, right? Where
Yeah.
yeah, you have certain classics, or maybe 40s, certain classics that have emerged, but we've yet to hit the limits of what we can do with this craft. We're still learning it. And you mentioned a bit earlier that writing games is more challenging than or a film. Or so I think that they're all challenging, right? They're all they're each of them, they are their own medium.
Yeah.
And I think that if you craft the story to that specific medium, then they're their own unique thing, and they each have their own challenges.
Yeah.
So games are a lot less economical than a film, for example. Films, you typically have a 60-hour like times two, like you have a 100-minute, you have a 100-minute time span,
Yeah.
and that 100-minute time span is extremely valuable real estate, because you have to tell entire story arcs in a very constrained time frame,
Yeah.
which means it's a very technical medium, right? You need to hit different acts, you need to hit different beats for your characters. So that's why I think that the challenge with that specific medium is how to how to be original within those constraints, and how to be economical in what you show and what you choose not to show, so
Yeah.
that you're true to that story that you're trying to tell in that very, compressed amount of time.
Yeah.
Games have a lot more, but a lot more time. Sometimes games have 100 hours
Yeah.
plus
Some people, it
experience.
takes 6 months to a year to complete a game, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then, but it's also another kind of story, right? Rather than being a roller coaster ride, like a film where you're going on a very linear perspective from your
A
main,
predetermined trajectory.
yeah,
Yeah.
from your main protagonist.
Yeah.
You're essentially creating stories where you're hopefully engaging people at an emotional and intellectual level. So the types of stories that you need to be telling, and the types of choices that you need to be confronting the player, and sometimes the contrasts between what the player needs to physically do and the moral implications of that, become all that more important, because you have that idea of agency and
Yeah.
player agency, right? So it's just a different kind of focus, and the sheer volume that you have to also write in order to populate an entire world
Yeah.
is in itself just very grueling, right? It's massive.
I love the comparison that you just made. And I'm also curious, for people that don't know, for
Mhm.
games, for example, a movie can take, on a lower end, a month, and on a larger end, 6 months, for
Mhm.
Jurassic Park. What does a
Mhm.
game take to develop?
It can take anywhere from, look, I will give you two examples that on two Assassin's Creed that I worked on. Revelations took us 10 months, but 10 months is not your typical dev time. This was sort of a mission impossible that we had. Um, you know, so it was, I think that the only reason that we pulled it off was because we had a brand new team of very, very, very dedicated people that wanted to prove that they were that they had what it took to be in this on this franchise.
Yeah.
And also we were lucky enough to have an extremely dedicated a group of people that were completely singular in our vision to reach a certain objective, right? So I would say 10 months, especially for a game of that scope, is very short.
Wow.
And then I can give you an example for Unity. Unity was about 5 years dev time. Uh,
5
so
years.
yeah, so you know, you, a typical game will take around 24 to 36 months of dev time. But depending on, like GTAs can take a lot longer. They can take closer to 5 or 7 years. It really depends on the size of the team. It depends on the ambition of the project. Indie games can be completed in a couple of months if you want to make just a small indie game that isn't overly ambitious in terms of scope.
Yeah.
But the bigger the game is, the more of an open world that you're creating, the more time and more people it takes. Just to give you an example on just an idea of the number of people that worked on Unity, we're talking about around 1,000 people across 10 studios.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, 1 second. My dog is going to make me.
It's okay.
All right, guy, come on. Come on. Let's go. Sorry about that.
No worries.
All right, pick back up. So that takes 10 months. Or it can take, you said 10 studios. And that's working like in multi-country, like wow. That's amazing. And so how, as a creative director, are you able to I don't want to say micromanage because that has bad connotations, but how are you able to manage that many? Like I know, for example, Game of Thrones has 7 units. You know what I mean? But they have to.
Yep.
Like how are you able to do that?
Look, I've often compared the experience to those stage magicians where you have these sticks and you have these plates that are spinning.
Oh
and,
yeah.
They run around and it starts wobbling and you need to spin it. So I mean that's the closest thing that I could compare it to. It becomes a the first thing you have to do is make sure that the vision is very clear to everybody. And then once you've formulated that vision, it becomes evangelizing that vision. Like you need to respond to give ownership to each of the owners of each department and each different studio, so that they first understand what the vision is, and then you need to give them the responsibility of maintaining it.
Yeah.
And once you've done that, it's just a matter of continuously over communicating to make sure that you keep everything aligned. Because no matter how small the divergence, even if it starts off small, as you grow it in time, it becomes very wide.
Wow.
So maintaining the vision, like as close as possible to one singular vision is
Yeah.
key. But honestly, I mean, there's many philosophies. I for one believe that there is. I think it is a lot more. It's a lot more effective to keep teams a bit smaller,
Yeah.
and to just, if need be, to work them a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Because I think it ultimately, the product is a more personal one, right?
Yeah.
What you're creating is more. There's more of everybody in them. When you assign too many people onto any project, it becomes much harder to keep the soul. You
Yeah.
know the Yeah.
I totally understand with what you're saying, and I'm very curious, because now these choose your own adventure games are the norm, But I kind of grew up with like NBA Jam and Mortal Kombat. What was the Jurassic Park equivalent in the gaming world that really set off the narrative sector of games?
Oh, I think there's been many. I think there's been many milestones across the years, throughout the years, that have been, sort of like game changers that have
Pun intended.
well,
But,
I mean,
yeah.
yeah, of course. The first one, look, and this is like going way back to my childhood, but the first game that essentially showed you that you can make games in a different way, where um, it it could be the user's experience and not just like a mini game,
Yeah.
was a game like Legends of Zelda.
Yeah,
And
totally. Ocarina of
and
Time. That
yeah,
was I
it,
played that whole one. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and even the first one. And this was the first time that the gaming industry was creating an open world,
Yeah.
so to speak, where it was up to the player to find what he or she had to do next. And how do you convey this to players when, before that time, games were all about, like Donkey Kong, a level, jumping and getting to the end, right?
Yeah.
So the creator of this game, Miyamoto, like, had a brilliant idea. He started the game off with, there was the first window in Legend of Zelda.
Yeah.
There was your character and there was a cave. And you know when you started playing, well, the first thing you did was you were attracted to the cave, so like, let's go into the cave. So you went there, and a wizard, essentially, there was this old man or a wizard or like an old sage, and there was a sword right under him. And when you moved towards the sword, you picked it up, and the wise man said, take this, you will need it on your adventure.
Wow.
Well, what that conveyed to players is, look, you've just acquired something. This
Yeah.
game is different. Everything you do here, you're going to need to figure out and to acquire yourself. And with this
Yeah.
very simple setup, he essentially messaged players, look, explore, find, discover. It's up to you to determine what to do next, not the game to tell you.
Yeah.
So that was certainly the first milestone in terms of video games, I think, that really changed everything.
Wow. And then I'm curious, because like I love your metaphor for like, if games are 1940s Hollywood. For example, we went from like, Charlie Chaplin kind of campy acting to a much more grounded, nuanced, like, The Lost Weekend kind of,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm curious, as games, if I'm staying on that metaphor, please, I hope I'm not losing people here, but the, let's say the 1-to-1 ratio of real world, like what you did with Perez. I've been to Notre Dame. I know that, or, rest in peace. I had been there, but I know the whole steps really well because I've spent so much time there. What was that always like a desire for game developers to be able to simulate the real world? Was that, and technology just didn't catch up with it in time?
Yeah, I think that developers, for the longest time, I mean, there's two ways to see that question. I think that developers have always wanted realism.
Yeah.
So even when you're doing something that's very sci-fi or even horror, like Doom, right?
Yeah.
Doom was
I
actually
played
another one of the.
Doom and
Oh,
Duke Nukem were my things.
so that was that
Yeah.
was another milestone, right? For the
Yeah.
first time, the invention of the first-person
I guess I
perspective.
am a gamer.
Yeah, yeah. But an amazing milestone. For the first time, there is no character. All you see is your hands, and
Yeah.
it's you, right?
Yeah.
So, but the desire was always to, how do we represent realism in the real world in as close as possible as we can. So
Yeah.
physics, and so that you can have that immersion. If it
Totally.
looks real and it feels
Suspension
real,
of disbelief still being
yeah,
the same goal.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So and we've like, technology has often been driven by the desire to simulate the real world, right? So that's definitely always been an ambition. Now, not all games, like all games, have wanted to get as close as possible to realism,
Yeah.
but not all games have wanted to simulate the actual real world. In the
Totally.
case of Assassin's Creed, that's always been the case. And when the game was first, when the IP, the brand, the world was being created by Ubisoft Montreal, there was always the very early on, when the first team was actually building the game, there was this question that was being asked by marketing, like, do people actually care about history? History is not important. Gamers don't care about history.
Yeah.
And the dev team always were fervent defenders of the idea that the reason that people don't care is because they don't know how cool history is.
Yeah.
And if you make history cool, if you show them what it actually was,
The French Revolution. Yeah.
then fans would care. And that was proven. Like Assassin's Creed made history cool.
Wow.
And from the first one, it was always the idea of shedding a new window on maybe sometimes forgotten parts of history, and
Yeah.
on pushing those limits of realism further and further and further in terms of the way that the world was represented.
Yeah.
Unity, I think, was probably one of the great accomplishments of the franchise, because for the first time we created a one-for-one replica
I
of the
saw
city.
that. I don't know if you know this,
Yeah,
but the trailer has like 45 million views and like
yeah,
250,000 likes. And
yeah,
and,
yeah,
and you narrate it.
yeah, yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So I think that was an amazing accomplishment of being able to actually, like, allowing people to imagine you can literally explore Paris as it was in the French Revolution, along with crowds of up to 10,000 people, and just be in the revolution. So I think that is definitely something that that idea of allowing people to teleport back in time or to a
Yeah.
different planet and existing there as somebody else, I think it's part of the true magic of video games.
And optically, how do you render that? Because like, yes, we know Paris is
Mm,
historically been, minus fires and world wars, certain
mm,
parts have been the same, but how are you able to, like, I know
mm,
Google Earth has a great job of
mhm,
having displays and renderings, but as
mhm,
a developer, how are people able develop
mm.
17th century France?
So that was actually pretty challenging, because Paris was completely, like, torn down and rebuilt by Napoleon III. So
Wow.
Napoleon III hired a guy called Haussmann, and Haussmann's job was to make Paris a capital worthy of France's place in the world, which was like a leader in culture and everything.
Yeah.
So another little less known reason why they did that is because there were a few riots in Paris, and tearing down the small medieval streets and making, like, wide boulevards makes it difficult for revolutions, and makes it difficult for people to riot.
Wow. No way. That's
So
amazing.
yeah, so the Paris of Unity is actually a Paris that nobody can see. Like, certain parts of Paris today were left untouched by Haussmann,
Yeah.
and those parts of Paris are similar in Unity. But the rest, what you see, except for the main landmarks that were never torn down, obviously,
Yeah.
the rest of Paris is, you get to see a Paris that you can no longer see today. So to do it, we had to look back and find old maps of the city, old plans, uh,
Architectural designs.
architectural designs, like blueprints and stuff like that.
Wow.
So all of that was painstakingly done by like a team of amazing artists. Notre Dame, by the way, took one modeler. It took her a year, 1 year, to model, like 3D sculpt Notre Dame. And that's excluding the people that then worked on building the materials and the stained glass, just the
And the
actual sculpting.
cobblestone and all the,
Yeah, yeah.
wow.
Just this, the sculpting of it took about a year for one modeler. Yeah, it took her about a year, 12 months.
And if we're staying with our movie metaphor,
Yeah.
I just came from a Tony Hawk podcast because
Mm-hmm.
I did play those games a lot. And he
Mm-hmm.
was, I don't know if you know, but they just did a re-release of the games where they redid Tony Hawk 1 and 2, and now it's been updated with like better, AR and much
Mm-hmm.
better landscapes. But he
Mm-hmm.
was talking about how EA and Activision developed that game simultaneously together, and then EA broke off and developed a game called EA Skate, and Activision stayed with Tony Hawk, and then they both kind of stopped because they realized they were, fighting for a smaller piece of the pie. With
Mm-hmm.
these, DIY or POV games, how is it, like we know, for example, with Jurassic Park, a company like Universal gives Steven Spielberg and George Lucas $120 million, and
Mm-hmm.
they have a year to two from pre-production to production to post to turn it around. Is it
Mm-hmm.
is it the same with a game?
Games are different because typically the way that traditionally films evolved and the way that studios evolved is very different. Games are their own thing in terms of industry, and even though there's elements that are similar to television or film, there's also the software component. So a lot of the way these companies were built is sometimes closer to the software world than the cinema world. So rather than having studios, finance films and giving them to external directors or external like collaborators, typically the crew of a not a TV show but of a film is an external crew that will be hired. The
Yeah.
studio will mandate a director and will finance, and then the director will form his or her crew. In the case of video games, it's pretty much internal. So, a company like EA or Activision or Ubisoft will want to do a game, and all of the people working on them, including the creative director, are employees of the company,
Yeah.
which makes the relationship a bit different between the company and the creative.
Yeah.
So the mandate, and this is very different for each company, um, but it is different than the film world.
And then narratively, because you said you can have 100 hours of experience, do you guys then storyboard every one, or do you write out the screenplay of each narrative and then you give it and like they implement it and hire act? Like, how does that part work?
No, I mean that's also different, and depending on the kind of game, and even depending on the company, each company has their own formula.
Yeah.
So and then the kind of game that you're making will also dictate how you do that. If you're making a very narrative game, like a single, a one-player, third-person action adventure title, like Last of Us or
Mm.
Uncharted, then you're obviously like that linear experience is going to be a lot more important than in a game like Assassin's Creed, where you're actually instead of telling one linear story, you're there will be a linear story that's told, but you're trying to you're favoring agency in an open world,
Yeah.
right? So typically, if you look at how you would do it in a typical Assassin's Creed game, the main storyline and the cinematics that constitute your main storyline are most of the time storyboarded, and this is what you sort of like you quantify, and then you plan and you block,
Yeah.
and you create animatics as you would a film. But a lot of the other narrative elements that you would get in a level, like scripted events. This is, for example, you're walking around the game, and one of the characters will ask you to go and fetch some keys, or you know a lot of those things are going to be done a little bit more on the fly, depending on what your needs are for a specific mission. So
Yeah.
it really depends. There's different tiers, right? The top level tier, the most high resolution or the most important narrative beats of the game, the main path beats are going to be done closer to a pipeline that would resemble a film,
Yeah.
in the sense that you're going to storyboard them and you're gonna block them, and then you're gonna create animatics. But a lot of the other, like what makes the bulk of your narrative experience in the game is a little bit more freehand, more done by the level designers and other people.
Yeah. Well, I want to move on to Reflector, but I want to say before
Mhm.
we finish on this, thank you for what you did. I mean, especially even me, you know, as someone who didn't play those games, just watching the trailers and the pure optics and the landscapes. I mean, the attention to detail. I mean,
Mhm.
thank you for creating such a, you know, I'm an actor, but I'm a storyteller. You know,
Mhm.
that's what we all
Yeah.
are. And so thank you for your service. But I'm really curious to talk to you about what you're doing now. And you started a company called Reflector Entertainment, and you
Mhm.
have a product called Unknown Nine that
Mhm.
sadly, like a lot of other projects, have kind of hit by the wayside of COVID. I'd like
Mhm.
to start with Reflector, and then we'll dig into Unknown Nine.
Sure. Um, Reflector is much is a continuation of in spirit of what I think that I originally started working on at Ubisoft with Assassin's Creed. So you know, very early on in my collaboration with Assassins, I realized that what we were creating was bigger than a game. I felt that we were working on a modern mythology. I think that the themes that we were exploring and the world that we were shaping um, were were too big to be confined by a single medium. And you know, we had an internal IP team,
Mhm.
or story world team,
Yeah.
and that internal word team was working with different collaborators on comic books, on novels, and you know, during my time there as creative director on Assassin's Creed, I collaborated very closely with those guys because I really felt that the story that we were telling in the games should be told through other media. So
Yeah.
instead of working on a novel that was just telling the same story that we were telling in the game, I instead tried favoring stories that were complementary. So by reading the novel, maybe you got a different perspective on certain characters that you didn't get to, you know,
Ah, it gave
to
you
meet.
more nuance to the story.
Exactly. You know,
Yeah.
like in Unity, there was this character called Elise, uh, and she was in and out of the game, and sometimes she would disappear for a lot of you know, for long beats. And I always wanted to tell her story. You know, what was she doing, and what was her struggle? Like
Yeah.
while Arnaud, the character in the game, was trying to essentially to do his stuff in the game, what was she
Yeah.
doing, and how did it all tie up? So
Yeah.
having a story that was seen through her eyes, from her perspective, was super important to me. When I worked on Revelations, we had two of the iconic characters of the IP, Ezio and Altair, and they were both sort of separated by about 300 years, but their stories were converging
Yeah.
in this game narrative. And I really wanted to tell the story, like what was happening in the background with these two characters. So we actually created two novels that went along with Revelations that were telling the story of these two characters that wasn't being told in the game, creating a parallel between the lives and the overall and ultimate ambitions of these two characters.
Yeah.
So, and when we started looking at the story of Assassin's Creed through that lens of a much broader story than just the game, we really started seeing a reaction from the fan base.
Yeah.
the the IP was taking on a life of its own.
Yeah.
Assassin's Creed was growing like a wildfire, and I really felt
Michael
that it was.
Fassbender loved it.
Yeah, absolutely. It did. Yeah. And so I really felt that we were onto something that um, in the world of today, I think that limiting ourselves or seeing our craft through the lens of the medium
Yeah.
is a mistake. I think that today, all of the channels are collapsing.
Yeah.
Fans no longer have, you know, like these things like that, you know, that never leave our sides.
Yeah.
Phones have become essentially windows and doors into any kind of medium. I can read a book, I can read a comic,
You can do a
I,
3D photo, you know? Yeah.
exactly. I
Yeah.
can play a game and I can watch a film. So why are we then not seeing what we're creating, you know, for what it is, truly universes and worlds? That's what
Yeah.
fans want today. The medium is just a means of getting into that world.
Yeah.
So Reflector is all about that. What if you were to create an entertainment company that wasn't that didn't identify itself through a medium, like a video game company or a film company
It
or
was cross-sector. It wasn't limited to one medium.
exactly. What if what we're creating is a modern mythology,
I
and then we're
love that.
using all of these different channels, like just ways of getting it to the audience. So that's what Reflector's about. So the first world that we're working on is called Unknown Nine, and as you mentioned, it was a little bit delayed by COVID.
Yeah.
We were supposed to launch in a big way at South by Southwest. We were,
With an
preparing something
interactive, like 2-week event for
Yep.
anyone that attended, correct?
Absolutely. We
Yeah.
were, opening up the entertainment a portion of South by Southwest with an amazing party, and then we were taking over the streets of Austin with this immersive live event.
Yeah.
And we were coordinating. And by the way, the immersive live event for me is just another way of telling the story, right? So we weren't seeing it as like a marketing ploy. We were really seeing it as a legitimate storytelling device
Yeah.
to tell a story to the audience. So, I mean, all of that stuff was paused because of COVID. We're going to delay it later in the year, but we're still very much in line to present Unknown Nine.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And I would love to talk to you about this whole AR, VR, augmented immersion phenomenon that we're going on. Like, obviously we've seen it in Hollywood. Like Black Mirror did, I don't know, was it a season or an episode that was Choose Your Own Adventure? And I know certain movies are starting to do it. Now, have you been to New York City recently?
I've been.
Before. Have you heard of Sleep No More?
Yes, I have.
Did you go?
Yes, many times. I know those guys very well.
Oh, Punch Drunk. Oh man, I love that. And I think, now we're seeing immersion in theater, which is, I think for a theater audience, those tend to, I don't mean to sound rude, but they tend to be more geriatric, so now you're having, young adults go to theater and having experience to like Sleep No More that they have in Assassin's Creed. And I think it's creating this whole sector. There's one down the street from me called Ben Chi Fell, which is the story of Alice in Wonderland. But I'm curious now with, things like the Google Oculus, and as technology has gotten further and further, how has that affected your world and the way in which you present the cross-sector, let's just call it multimedia?
Yeah. So I think that VR and AR are tools like any other.
Could you break down the difference just so for the audience?
Sure. VR essentially puts a veil over your eyes, so it covers your eyesight, and it replaces it with screens where you can essentially transport people into a different world, a different time, a different place.
So the Oculus would be VR?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then you have AR. AR is, think of it like augmented reality, right? That's what it is. It lets you see the world, but it can overlay things over the world.
Kind of like Snapchat filters can add,
exactly.
Got it.
So Magic Leap or HoloLens from Microsoft, those are AR, right? So they're really good for two different things. Like if you really want to transport somebody into a different world, VR is great because you can literally replace the world with whatever world.
And I've had those. You really do feel like your balance and your entire sense of gravity is totally out of. It's crazy.
Yeah, and mix that in with some fancy treadmill that allows you to sort of walk.
Yeah.
Combine that with air or heat.
Yeah.
It really can feel like you're actually there. Imagine coming out of this tunnel and into this, amazing valley, and have the wind just hit you when you're in there. Your brain truly believes that you're there.
Yeah.
Whereas AR is really good if you want to convey extra information. Yeah. So let's say I want to play detective and I want to have clues. I can literally have stuffed arrows point into certain places, and I can augment reality.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And so do you think, VR, because I know like if you go back to Terminator 2, he's got VR, but now is AR going to be the future?
I think they're good for two different things. Again, if you really want to transport somebody into a different world, I think VR is great. I think if you want people to remain in the real world, but you want to add a gamification element, or you want to add characters that aren't really there,
Yeah.
then AR is great. If you want to add, a heads-up display or a menu
Yeah.
like you would have in a game in reality, well, AR is great for that. So I think that they're still in their infancy. I think that
Can you
they'll,
talk about the Madonna performance? Because that was AR,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yep, yep. So this is something that, because Reflector is all about storytelling across all media.
Yeah.
Uh, it's important for me to it's important for me to for Reflector to stay up to date in everything that is emergent in terms of media. So AR and VR are certainly emerging forms. So for us to sort of always remain on the edge, on the fringe of what is being developed,
Yeah.
we sometimes take on like these R&D projects that allow us to essentially keep our expertise on the edge.
Yeah. Stay
So
sharp. Totally.
exactly. So
Yeah.
we had this opportunity to work with Madonna on her big comeback song, and we spoke with Madonna's people, and they wanted to do a performance, but they wanted to do something that had never been done before. So we collaborated with her team to essentially bring to life simultaneous many versions of Madonna simultaneously with her during a live performance. And
Wow.
so what we did there was real-time integration of augmented reality
Got
into
it.
live TV. So those characters, the audience couldn't see them, but we were actually integrating those personas directly into the live feed of the television
Wow.
um, as she was giving her performance, which
Yeah.
was very innovative.
Yeah. That's amazing. And speaking of performances, that kind of reminds me because I was there when it happened. I was stupid. I don't mean to. I was younger. I'm sober now, but I was at Coachella and
Yeah,
a Tupac hologram happened,
yeah,
and I
yeah,
remember
yeah,
everyone was just like, "Whoa!" Everyone's obviously on drugs, but
yeah, yeah,
it was quite a surreal experience.
yeah.
And I remember everyone, after Coachella ended for like a year, was talking about holograms. Is that something that you think is going to become, like as technology progresses and our televisions are capable of more and more integration? Is that something you think will become?
So I think that holograms, I mean, they've certainly been around for a long time. It's
Yeah,
something called Pepper's Ghost, right? It's done with a sheet of glass, and you're projecting something on the glass, and from the audience's perspective, you have
it's
a
3D.
yeah, you have a
Yeah,
certain degree. So I think that um, as technology continues to improve, and we're able to display um, um, holograms in more and more three-dimensional ways. Right now, Pepper's Ghost is a very old tech, and it's literally flat. But I think that we're on the verge of being able to display stuff three-dimensionally. Once
yeah,
we're able to do that, I think that it's going to open up the door to a whole new area of entertainment.
yeah,
Imagine just imagine walking into a stand-up club and getting to experience Richard Pryor from the
yeah.
70s, right?
Oh my God. And
Yeah.
and you think that's going to be a thing? Like, in 2030, we're going to see Kurt Cobain for 2 weeks at Madison Square Garden.
Why not? I mean,
Yeah,
technically we could certainly do it, and even with AR, that's the
yeah,
thing with AR is that as the glasses become more and more like like high tech in the way that
yeah,
they project the image, and as they become smaller and smaller, today they're big clunky things, but 10 years from now they might look and feel exactly like a pair of glasses or sunglasses that you put on.
yeah,
When it gets there, then it becomes very easy for people to carry them around.
yeah.
And then as the technology improves and you're able to make the images that they project more and more opaque, then I think that the ability to project content directly into your world, and even people that are past, I mean, it's certainly going to be possible. Then it really depends on whether the audience wants that or not.
And how to monetize it correctly.
Of
That's
course.
yeah. And then I'm very curious, because I want to plug it proper. For those interested, what more can you say about Unknown Nine? Where can they go? Where can they
Mhm.
find out? How can they stay in touch?
So if they want to find out a little bit more about it, they can go to unknown9.com, and they're going to get a little bit of a teaser. But and they should definitely register their emails, because then, once we start announcing stuff, they're going to get a little bit of a ping from us. But stay tuned, because end of this year we're going to start announcing in a big way. And
and that's unknown nine, the number, not nine.
Yep,
Cool.
yep.
Right.
Unknown9.com. And just for people to get a sense of what it is, it's essentially a universe that is an occult thriller universe. It's all about lifting the veil on the world and seeking the unknown. It's almost like, imagine the world as we know it is a lot more magical than we give it credit for. And there's stuff at work right under our very eyes. And there's people at work that have been sort of guiding humanity towards a very specific goal. And Unknown 9 is all about that mystery. And it's a very active world. Rather than asking the audience to just be passive, a passive audience, we're really encouraging the audience to be part of the mystery and unraveling it with us.
I love that.
We're working on a novel trilogy, a comic book series, a podcast series, a video game, a series, a TV series, a bunch of digital series. We have an online platform that we're also developing. So this is going to be big, and I think people are going to find it pretty cool.
I can't wait, so I can, when it happens, I'm going to be like, oh, that's my homie. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Final few questions for you, Alex. I'm so grateful for your time, and thank you for coming on. And I'm sorry if I asked you to expound on some things. I'm a little bit new to this world, so I just want to make sure I understand it correctly. But what's inspiring you now? I feel like I kind of touched on this at the beginning of the podcast. Like, movies aren't as inspiring as they once were, and now television is interesting. But where are, the storytellers that you're interested in? What's inspiring you?
I get my inspiration from a whole bunch of places. Like television is certainly in a golden age right now, and films are maybe in a little bit of a rut. But these things are cyclical. I wouldn't write off films at this point. Actually, I think that if you want to look for opportunity, you have to look to the places that aren't doing so well, right? So I think that maybe films are in a really good place for a rebirth soon, maybe a fresh take. So, I think that, my inspiration comes from, like, I love excellence. I love it when I just love quality stuff. So whatever the genre, whatever the medium, as long as it's original, fresh, it's got a fresh perspective, and there's excellence, I'm in. Like, I love stories, I love characters, and I love, large sprawling worlds. So I'm a real fanboy, if you will. So as soon as there's something that touches upon all those points that I mentioned, I'm there.
That's amazing. I love that. And for those young Alexes out there that are studying physics, but they love gaming and they have no idea of how to forge their path ahead, any words of wisdom, advice for them?
I think that if people follow their passions, and if they have to be willing to make the sacrifices come along with it, because excellence is not something that you attain, it's something that you strive for. And as long as you have that mindset, and as long as it feels right to you, if you work like crazy on something and it doesn't feel like work, odds are you're passionate about it. Then if you follow that, worst comes to worst, if success doesn't come in the timeline that you maybe thought it was going to come in, at least you're having fun and a hell of a ride. And that's what you can ask for to anybody. Like, just have fun.
The gift is doing what you love in this life, and that's what we all strive for. Alex Amancio, thank you for coming on, man. This is one of my favorite episodes, and let's do it again. Let's come back on in January whenever this goes live.
It's a deal, man. Anytime, Ryan. It was a pleasure.
I love you, brother. So much love. Thank you for coming on, and to be continued.
Thanks, man.
All right.
Yep. All right. Thanks, man.